realistic. But we will get to the point that by 2050 we have zero emissions. Jim Tankers, the New York Times.
Thank you so much. I'd like to actually start by following up on Jeff's question and then ask you about supply chains as a follow-up to that. But on the question of oil prices, economists say that when you raise the price of something, people will consume less of it. So why not allow even middle-class people around the world to pay more for gasoline in the hope that they would consume fewer fossil fuels and emit less?
Well, because they have to get to their work. They have to get in an automobile, turn on the key, get their kids to school. The school buses have to run. That's the reason why. You know that, Jim. That's the reason. The idea that there's an alternative to walk away from being able to get in your automobile is just not realistic. It's not going to happen. And this wasn't intended to happen. And by the way, when the cost of a gallon of gasoline gets to above $3.35 a gallon, it has profound impact on working class families just to get back and forth to work. So I don't see anything inconsistent with that, but I do think that the idea that Russia and Saudi Arabia and other major producers are not going to pump more oil so people can have gasoline to get to and from work, for example, is not right. But and what we're considering doing that, I'm reluctant to say before I have to do it.
On supply chain, sir, one of the obviously big problems in the United States for supply chains is not having enough workers, not enough people to drive trucks to unload at ports, for example, a lot of other parts in the supply chain. Workers have not returned to the labor force in America as fast as your administration thought they would. Why do you think that is? Why aren't
because they're able to negotiate for higher wages and they move from one job to another. That's one of the reasons why. A lot of people don't want to continue to do the job they did before, making $7, $8, $9 an hour. An awful lot of the truck drivers are not unionized truck drivers. They're working like hell and not getting paid a whole lot. And so what you're seeing here is a combination of the desire of people to be able to change professions, to be able to do more and take care of their families, and at the same time dealing with an issue that, in fact, we are short of workers. But worker pay has actually gone up, and we've employed 6 million people just since I got elected. So employment's up. The economy is actually, in spite of all this, still growing. You have the significant number of, I forget the number, I think it was close to 60 major economists acknowledging that what's going to happen is you're going to see continued economic growth under our proposals. You had a total of 14, I think it was 14, Nobel laureate economists in economics saying this is going to, what I'm proposing, to reduce the inflation, et cetera. So there's a lot going on. Look, we really are, I know you're tired of hearing me say this, we really are at one of the inflection points in history. So much is changing. So many pieces on the table are moving. And how they get resettled depends upon the judgments we make and whether or not the United States, among others, can lead the world in a direction that's going to increase the circumstances for a higher standard of living for workers here and abroad, as well as making sure that people have an opportunity. As I said again, I used the phrase, just have a little breathing room. I meant what I said when I ran. My desire was to build this economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down. And that's what's in process of happening. But in the meantime, there's been enormous changes as a consequence of COVID on the supply chains, because why are we having trouble? An awful lot of the very factories and operations that in fact produced material that we need for supply chains, and everything from shoes to dealing with computer chips, they're out sick, they're not working. And so it's changing. The economy is changing, and the United States has to stay ahead of the curve. That's why I introduced the infrastructure bill. That's why I also introduced the Build Back Better initiative. The Washington Post, Sung Men Kim. There you are. I'm sorry, I couldn't see you.
Thank you, Mr. President. On Iran, How will you determine whether the Iranians are serious about rejoining the nuclear talks, as they have indicated they will do by the end of November? And what costs are you prepared to impose on Iran if it continues to carry out attacks against the United States, such as the recent drone strikes against U.S. forces in Syria?
Well, in a sense, there are two different issues. One is whether or not we get to the JCPOA, we rejoin that, and that depends. That's why I had the meetings with my colleagues here in Rome, who are part of the original group of 6 people, 6 nations that got together to say that we should negotiate a change, which I found that I think we're continuing to suffer from the very bad judgments that President Trump made in pulling out of the JCPOA. And so that's one issue, and that issue is going to depend on whether and how that gets resolved is going to depend on their action and the willingness of our friends who were part of the original agreement to stick with us and make sure there's a price to pay economically for them to fail to come back. With regard to the issue of how we're going to respond to actions taken by them against interests of the United States, whether they're drone strikes or anything else, is we're going to respond. We're going to continue to respond. ABC, Cecilia Vega. It's hard to see you guys with a mask on. I apologize.
And the masks are making my glasses fog up, so I apologize too. Thank you, sir. On climate change, you just mentioned the incentives you have on renewable energy in your Build Back Better plan. You do have a number of incentives, but as it stands right now, there are no punitive measures in this plan to hold these companies accountable, and many experts firmly believe that you've got to have the stick along with the carrot in order to get to your goal to reduce emissions by 2030 by 50%. So can you stand here today and say to the world that you definitively will still meet that goal?
Yes, I can, because what we're proposing and what we've initiated is everything from getting the automobile makers to commit to going all electric, number one, getting the unions to agree to do that as well, making sure we have the investment in battery technology that requires us to have the ability to generate electric vehicles, electric buses, electric transportation grids, making sure that we are dealing with everything from, let me go through some of these, that we have tax credits for $320 billion for dealing with alternatives by people getting tax credit for moving on solar panels, on wind, and a whole range of other things, and winterizing their properties. I don't think you're going to need any punitive action to get people to step up and do those things. There's been no indication that's the case at all with regard to, there's a total of $555 billion in climate, and I'm just checking the numbers, make sure I'm right, and climate investment in terms of resilience. Where now it's very much in the interest of the industry to see to it that we move to making sure that we have the resilience to be able, when those towers come down and the lines end up hitting the ground and burning down large swaths of the West, to bury this underground. There's a whole range of things. I don't think we're going to have to. Everybody knows which direction it's going, and there's no indication that there has to be a punitive effort to get people to react the way in which we have to do. At least I don't believe so.
If I may, on your meeting with Pope Francis, the more than 50 million Catholics back at home are seeing something play out that has never happened before. This split in the conservative wing of the Catholic Church moving to deny someone like you, a Catholic president, the sacrament of communion. For these Catholic back home, what did it mean for you to hear Pope Francis, in the wake of this, in the middle of this debate, call you a good Catholic? And did what he tell you, should that put this debate to rest?
Look, I'm not going to, a lot of this is just personal. Pope Francis has become I don't want to exaggerate it, he's become someone who's provided great solace for my family when my son died. He is, in my view, there's always been this debate in the Catholic Church, going back to Pope John the 23rd, that talk about how we reach out and embrace people with differences. If you notice what the Pope said when it was asked, when he first got elected Pope, he was traveling with the press, and they said, "What's your position on homosexuality?" I said, "Who am I to judge?" This is a man who is of great empathy. He is a man who understands that part of his Christianity is to reach out and to forgive. So I just find my relationship with him one that I personally take great solace in. He is a really, truly, genuine, decent man. And I'll end by saying that, there were an awful lot of people who, and many of you, I'm not putting you in this position, I apologize, but many of you who are even in the press who went out of your way to express your empathy and sympathy when I lost the real part of my soul, when I lost my beau, my son. And my family will never forget, my extended family, because it was only a matter of days since my son had passed away. And Pope Francis came to the United States to visit with not only President Obama, but with the Catholic Church here. And I was asked if I would accompany him to Philadelphia, to the seminary, and anyway. And I did, but it was, the wounds were still raw of the loss of my son, and I had my extended family, and you're all tired to see my extended family. They're always around, my grandchildren, my children, my wife, my daughters-in-law. And before he left and got in the plane, the Pope asked whether or not he could meet with my family. And we met in a hangar at the Philadelphia airport. And he came in and he talked to my family for a considerable amount of time, 10, 15 minutes, about my son, Beau. And he didn't just generically talk about him. He knew about him. He knew what he did. He knew who he was. He knew where he went to school. He knew what a man he was. And it had such a cathartic impact on his children and my wife and our family that it meant a great deal. And as I meant what I said, everybody was laughing. I didn't realize you all were able to film what I was doing with the Pope when I gave him a command coin. And I meant what I said. This is a man who is someone who is looking to establish peace and decency and honor, not just in the Catholic Church, but just generically. When I won, he called me to tell me how much he appreciated the fact that I would focus on the poor and focus on the needs of people who are in trouble. So I just, again, I don't want to talk more about it because so much of it is personal, but he is everything I learned about Catholicism from the time I was a kid going from grade school through high school. I have great respect for people who have other religious views, but he's just a fine, decent, honorable man, and we keep in touch. I thank you all very, very much for your patience. Thank you.